observe appropriate standards of tone, wording, and content in their remarks. I now give the floor to Mr. Khaled Kiari.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies. The United States military presence and operations in the Southern Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela have increased since this Council last discussed the situation on 10th of October, further heightening tensions between the two countries. The United States described its military deployment as part of a, quote, non-international armed conflict, end quote, against drug cartels and drug trafficking, invoking Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations. President Donald Trump has stated that he is going to use the full power of the United States to take on and eradicate these drug cartels, no matter where they are operating from. The Venezuelan government, including its permanent representative, has described the measures by the United States as a serious threat to international peace and security. Most recently, in a letter dated 16 December and addressed to the President of the Security Council, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela asserted that the United States is violating the principle prohibiting the threat or use of force in international relations. Mr. President, U.S. strikes on vessels alleged to be illegally carrying drugs in the Southern Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific have continued. According to United States authorities, 105 individuals have been killed in these strikes since 2 September. Officials have stated that the strikes have taken place in international waters or in the Southcom area of responsibility. The exact locations of these incidents have not been disclosed. In a statement on 31st October, the High Commissioner for Human Rights said that the airstrikes by the United States of America on boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific, allegedly linked to drug trafficking, violate international human rights law. The High Commissioner added that countering illicit trafficking of drugs across international borders is, as has long been agreed among states, a law enforcement matter governed by the careful limits on lethal forces set out in international human rights law. He called for prompt, independent, and transparent investigations. Mr. President, in late November, President Nicolas Maduro and President Trump held a telephone conversation. On 24th November, the United States designation of the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization entered into force under U.S. law. Subsequently, the United States imposed additional measures against organizations and individuals it alleges are linked to these activities. On 29 November, President Trump declared that the airspace above and around Venezuela should be considered closed in its entirety. This followed an alert issued by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration a few days earlier, warning major airlines of a potentially hazardous situation when flying over Venezuela. Since then, most international airlines have suspended or canceled flights to and from the country. Venezuelan authorities have described this as an attempt to impose an air blockade. The International Civil Aviation Organization issued a statement on 1st of December recalling that, and I quote, Article 1 of 1944 Convention of International Civil Aviation recognizes that every state has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory, end of quote. The statement further noted, and I quote, any state can issue any information to its own operators regarding risks for flights over or in proximity of any geographic zones, including of another state, end of quote. On 10 December, tensions increased further when President Trump announced that the United States had seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela, stating that the government of Venezuela was using oil to finance criminal activities. He also declared that, and I quote, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization under United States law and ordered the total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela, end of quote. Subsequently, the United States authorities imposed sanctions on 6 shipping companies operating in Venezuela's oil sector and 6 vessels allegedly associated with these companies, which the U.S. claims have engaged in deceptive and unsafe shipping practices. Venezuelan authorities described these actions as a unilateral naval blockade. In identical letters dated 17 December and addressed to the Secretary General and the President of Security Council, the permanent representative of Venezuela stated that the U.S. actions violate Venezuela's national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. The letter further asserted that the naval blockade imposed unilaterally constitutes a violation of international law. In recent days, reports indicate that the Venezuelan Navy has been escorting ships departing its ports with petroleum products. On 20 December, the United States interdicted another tanker off the coast of Venezuela that was transporting oil from Venezuela. According to United States announcement, the vessel was suspected of carrying oil subject to sanction under U.S. laws. On 20 December, U.S. Coast Guard pursued a third oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Reportedly, the ship did not submit to boarding during the attempted interdiction and continued sailing away from the Caribbean Sea. U.S. actions have received support from some regional allies, but other member states within and beyond the region have voiced concern over the militarization of the Southern Caribbean and stressed the importance of respecting national sovereignty and international law. Several member states have echoed call for de-escalation and dialogue to address ongoing tensions. Mr. President, Excellencies, in September, citing external threats, President Maduro enacted a decree expanding the government's emergency powers. Public life has become further militarized, while Venezuelans continue to face serious human rights concerns and socioeconomic challenges. The UN Human Rights Office reported coerced enlistment into the Bolivarian militia, including adolescents and older persons. The High Commissioner has also reported on sweeping restrictions on freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, arbitrary detention and enforced disappearances, as well as acute social and economic strain. He called for an immediate end of enforced disappearances, incommunicado detention, and unauthorized transfers of detainees to unknown locations. The High Commissioner further reiterated the disproportionate impact of broad sectoral sanctions on Venezuela's most vulnerable populations, noting that these measures also hinder the work of human rights and humanitarian organizations. He called for the sanctions to be reassessed and lifted. Venezuela's economy was already extremely fragile, with soaring inflation, currency instability, and widespread income erosion. Millions are unable to meet basic needs. Recent air and maritime restrictions, along with reduced exports, risk further constraining the government's fiscal ability to deliver basic public services. As the humanitarian situation deteriorates, the United Nations and its partners continue to work and deliver assistance in support of the Venezuelan people, including through recent financial allocations of the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund and the Venezuela Humanitarian Fund. Mr. President, on 17 December, at his request, President Maduro held a telephone conversation with the Secretary General. The Secretary General reaffirmed the United Nations position on the need for member states to respect international law, particularly the United Nations Charter, exercise restraint, and de-escalate tensions to preserve regional stability. The Secretary General stands ready to support all efforts at diplomatic engagement, including the exercise of his good offices, if both parties so requested. He welcomes initiatives by member states, offers for mediation, and proposals for peaceful solutions. Dialogue is the only viable path toward lasting peace and preventing further instability and human suffering. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Chiari for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, We wish to thank Khaled Kiari for his briefing. For several months now, the entire world has had the opportunity to observe the way that the United States has been continuing to deliberately foment tensions around the friendly nation of Venezuela under the pretext of combating drug trafficking and the terrorist threat. Illegally destroying at the same time the civilian vessels in the Caribbean Sea. We, during the previous Security Council meeting, we all had an opportunity to see the fact that this artificial smokescreen is concealing the goal of U.S. military groups being shored up and the delivery of the exerting tension on an independent state whose policy is not to the liking of Washington. It seems that the White House decided to remove from the mothballs the previously embraced practice of portraying combating terrorism as justification for blatant aggression and intervention in the affairs of sovereign states. And this time, the so-called foreign terrorist organization has been